Hey, alpha males. I wanted to throw out an older episode again from 2018. Yes, this podcast was around in 2018. This one's on manly cooking and recipes, and I know by God's grace we get new listeners all the time, especially in the last couple of years. Hopefully it'll excuse the more archaic audio quality or the fact that I wasn't as eloquent an orator then as I am now. It's one of the things as a man being an alpha male, you should get better at something. You should strive to be better at it. Hopefully you appreciate that, but hopefully you still appreciate the older content. Anyway, with that, I hope you enjoy this older episode on manly recipes and cooking. Hello, welcome to the Alpha Male Podcast, the podcast where we talk about being an alpha male in today's modern society, what that looks like, and how to be a better one. As always, I am your host, Michael Melito. First and foremost, I'm a Christian. It shapes everything that I do. I look at everything through that lens. This podcast is no different. I am a Christian man, and I make no apologies for that. Little quick bio. Grew up in the South, joined the Marine Corps at 17, combat veteran, infantry. I got out for a while. I did law enforcement, including LAPD. Done some private contracting work, and I am back in the military, a different branch. I won't say which one because I'm currently still serving and it's not affiliated with this podcast. And I am a professional firearms instructor. A lot more to my life than that, but really just a quick bio. It'll let you know a little bit about me. Today's topic is going to be manly recipes. Now, yes, women should know how to cook, but men should also know how to cook. Cooking is a manly skill. We covered it in our manly skills episode. If you don't think taking a big piece of meat that you shot and killed yourself and throwing it on a fire and cooking it is manly, you are wrong. That is a manly thing. Now, I've wanted to do this episode for a while, at least one almost like the one I'm going to do today. I want to do the manliest foods, but I wanted the guests I usually have on here, the professional stand-up comedian Steve Halverson, to come on with me. Because I thought it would be a more enjoyable episode to get some different takes about, and I'm still going to do that episode in the future, manliest foods. But today's going to be manly recipes, some of my favorite manly recipes. So I'll go through those. But we'll get into this more in our manly food, our manliest foods episode. But meat is about as manly as you can get. Just look up YouTube and some Ron Swanson quotes on food. Meat is about as manly as you can get, and meat that you've killed yourself is even more manly. That kind of doubles the manliness factor of manly food. But my first one, it's not going to pertain to wild game. You can cook the ribs of wild game, elk and deer, but you really got to pressure cook them. They don't have a lot of fat, and they're really not as good as good old-fashioned beef. And I think the best ribs there are beef ribs. They're big, they're meaty, they're delicious. I'm going to give you a great recipe for beef ribs. And I don't write any of this stuff down. It's coming straight out of my head, so I'll do the best I can with this. You take your beef ribs. You put them in a metal pan. Okay? You put them in the oven. You put your oven on low, like 200 degrees, 220 degrees tops. Okay? You get that preheated. You cover your ribs in a dry rub. Now, you can use a lot of different stuff for dry rubs. Make a lot of different flavors. But you basically want some good, thick, heavier than regular table salt. Some good kosher salt or even thicker rock salt. Big, thick salt like you would buy before you grind it up. Some Himalayan pink salt or any kind of salt like that. Mediterranean sea salt. You take that. Now, be a judge, don't over salt it, but you want good salty meat. Okay, so you're going to use that. I like to use a little bit of red cayenne pepper, a little bit of black pepper, a little bit of white pepper if you have it, but if not, the red and the black will work just fine. You get some of that. Now, that's really all you need for this dry rub. You can add other stuff if you want, if you are a connoisseur of that kind of stuff, but really that's all you really need. What you're going to do, those ribs are going to be covered in fat and meat and all kinds of goodness. You just want to kind of rub that dry rub on there as much as will stick on there. You want it to stay on there. If it's not being real sticky at first, you can Take a little bit of olive oil and rub that on there, and then you can rub the dry rub on top of that so it really gets on there. Then you're just going to take your pan, you're going to cover that with tin foil, and you're going to throw that in that oven. Now you're going to cook this for several hours. This is not a fast recipe. This is something you do on like a Sabbath, on a Sunday, when you got several hours, you're going to be just chilling. You're going to throw this big old pile of ribs. Keep them all, don't cut them up, just keep them in big piles, throw them on that big pan, and put them in the oven. Cook them like that for several hours. Now I can't give you a time frame, but keep them on that very low heat, and keep checking them. I love rare meat. I love rare red meat, but you really don't want ribs to be rare. You want them to be fairly well done. So keep poking them and stabbing them every couple hours. I would say no less than 2 hours, maybe as much as 4 hours. But you want that. If they're not cooking, it's been like 3 or 4 hours and they're still kind of red, crank up the heat a little bit, but not too much. But when they're no longer bloody on the inside, they're pretty much done. Now, I want you to take the ribs out. Now, this is where the magic happens, okay? You can do this one of two ways. If you want to keep cooking them in the oven, you can turn your oven on broil, the very hottest of the heat on your oven. Or, even better, you can get an open flame, a grill, a fire. Any kind of fire will work. A really good, strong, hot fire. I'm talking about not like blown out, because I'm talking like on fire, like flames are reaching up. This is the kind of fire that you want. Now what you do is you make your wet sauce. Okay, you don't have to do this. You can eat them with just a dry rub, and you can do this process and not add this wet sauce, but this is really going to be amazing if you do this. Now, what you want to do is, it's a simple recipe. It's grape jelly. Yes, grape jelly. You're going to take grape jelly and KC Masterpiece. Now, there's a lot of good barbecue sauces out there. You can make your own. I like making my own barbecue sauce, but for this, really, KC Masterpiece and grape jelly in equal proportions. You mix that all together really good. You even might want to heat it up a little bit so it gets all homogeneous and gets all mixed in really well. And you want to cover those ribs in that mixture. Okay? Now this is where you got to pay attention. You're going to put it in the broiler, or you're going to put it on that flame for just a few minutes. And then take it off and coat it again, and take it off and coat it again, till it gets really thick and sticky. And it's going to be delicious. Now you take it off, you let it cool down before you cut the ribs. When the ribs are safe to handle, like you can touch them without getting burnt, then you want to start cutting them. You don't want to cut them too early, because then all that juice and all that goodness is going to run out of there. But trust me, be patient, and be careful taking them out of the oven. One of the wickedest scars I ever had was not from going to combat, not from going to wars, from taking these ribs out of the oven and spilling that hot, greasy rib juice all over my arm and getting really severe burns on my forearms. So that being said, they're so good that I still made them after that. So that's pretty much a recipe for ribs, and it's an awesome one. All right, next one is one of my day-to-day recipes. Eggs are manly. You know the manliest way to cook eggs? Don't. Just break them, throw them in a glass, and drink them. I do that all the time, especially when I get back from the gym and I'm in a hurry, or I'm going somewhere and I'm hungry. They're cheap, they're delicious, they're better for you than a protein shake. Now, you can say, oh, it'll make you sick, and I'm not telling you it's safe to do this, because the Department of Making You Sad from the government would probably get me in trouble. So I'm not saying this is safe. I'm not saying that you should do this. I'm saying that I eat raw eggs all the time. I have for years and years, all the time, and I've never gotten sick from it. That being said, I'm not recommending that you do it, but I'm saying that I do it, and that's a very manly way to eat eggs. If you don't like the taste, whatever, drink them anyway. Or you can add a little bit of milk and shake them up, just some raw eggs and milk, old school protein shake, awesome. But if you want to actually cook the eggs and still keep them manly, I like sunny side up. I like over easy. All right, the way to do this, get a good non-stick pan. I love good cast iron pans, and I love good stainless steel pans. But for this, you really want a good non-stick pan. Coat it with some oil, whatever kind of oil, coconut oil, olive oil. Get a good coating on there. Turn it up to a low to medium heat. This is where you mess up cooking these kind of eggs. And just break the egg and drop it in the pan. Try and keep the yolk in one piece. Okay? Here's the big thing about cooking eggs. Be patient. It might take a little bit of time. If you crank the heat way up, it's going to burn the bottom, and the top's still going to be runny. Okay, if you're trying to cook them this way, you want a good slow heat. If you can cover the pan, that's even better. And here's a little tip. If you're impatient, don't crank the heat up. Put that lid on there, let it get really hot, and then drop a little bit of water in there, like a couple teaspoons full, and cover it. It'll steam up and it'll cook the top of the eggs faster. But whenever that yolk gets to where it looks like you want it, whether you want a little bit firm or a little bit runny or a lot runny, when that white is done and that yolk looks like that, then take them off and they're done. A little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper. I like them with mustard, but you can throw some hot sauce on there, pretty good. Whatever you want to throw on there, but just salt and pepper, even a little bit of cheese is good. But that's the way to cook eggs that way. Now, if you're going to scramble your eggs and you want them to actually taste good, I just throw them in a pan and crack them and scramble them up. I don't really care. And cook them on high heat because I'm in a hurry and I'm hungry. But if you actually want the best scrambled eggs, you want to throw them in a pan, a good non-stick pan if you can. You can put a little bit of oil on there, but not a lot because you're going to mix them up anyway, and it usually doesn't do too much. So crack all your eggs in a bowl first to get a good homogeneous mixture. You can add a little bit of milk if you want. I don't. Sometimes you can add a little bit of water, do the same thing, but you really want to whisk them up really well and dump them in your pan. Okay, now here's the key. Dump them in your pan at a low heat and be patient and stir them continuously. Get a good spatula, a good, I don't know what they're called. I'm not a chef, but kind of soft plastic spoons that are kind of flexible on the end, and go all around the outside of your pan and the inside of your pan and continuously stir them on low heat until they look nice and white and fluffy and they stop looking wet. As soon as they stop looking wet, they're done. Don't overcook them. As soon as they stop looking wet and glossy, they're done. Take them off. Don't keep cooking them. They're going to get dry and hard and not as good. And then throw whatever you want on there. Cheese, salt, and pepper. Whatever you want. Hot sauce. But there is eggs. One of the manliest foods you can cook. They're cheap. They're easy. They're delicious. They're good for you. That's my go-to every night before I go to bed. Around 9 eggs, sometimes more. That's my thing. I go work out. I come home. I cook eggs. I'll cook them however. If I'm in a hurry, I'll eat them raw. But eggs, manly. You know what's also manly? Spinach. Spinach is manly. I eat a lot of spinach. Now, if you want the manliest way to eat it, just do it like Popeye. I do it all the time. Just pop the top off the can and just grab a fork and just eat them right out of the can. But if you want them to taste a little bit better, I'll be honest, I don't like the way they taste. I just eat them I eat spinach like that because I'm in a hurry and it's good for you. And it's better than a Snickers bar or whatever other crap people eat. But if you want a good way to cook spinach, get a good broad pan. Throw a little bit of water on there. I'm talking about whole leaf spinach, not canned spinach this time. Get fresh spinach. Rinse it off. Put a little bit of water in the pan. Turn the pan on. It can be a medium to high heat. Doesn't really matter. You want that water just to where it starts to get the boil, and then you dump all your spinach in there. You can put a lot of spinach in there. You can put it so it's like mounding over the top of the pan, because when it cooks, it's going to cook down a lot. So as soon as it starts getting hot, you can what I'm saying is you can like make the pan overflow with spinach, because it's going to cook down a lot, like 2 or 3 times less than when you started. So once you get it to the point where it's no longer hard and starts to be really soft, then it's done. I mean, it's spinach. You can eat it raw, so you don't have to overcook it. And then the key is don't let it burn, because if it burns, it tastes horrible. Burnt spinach tastes really bad. Don't ask me how I know. But that's pretty much it. You just basically steam it. And then the steam rises up and it cooks it and makes it soft, and it's really good like that. You add a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper, and it's just fine. But if you want to make it even better, make cream spinach. The best way to do this is with a little bit of heavy whipping cream. Not whipped cream like you normally buy at the store, like whipping cream, like when you used to make it old school and you'd make it yourself and beat it until it turned into whipped cream. It's the old school whipping cream. If you don't have that, you can also use half and half. You take a little bit of half and half, you drain that spinach till almost all the water is out of it. You add a little bit of cream to it. If you want to go crazy, if you're eating it for like a dinner or having it with something, that cream spinach, add the cream to it and just a little bit of garlic powder. I like fresh garlic, but for this, garlic powder really works better. And just that and a little bit of salt, and it is amazing. Okay, next recipe we're going to talk about some wild game recipes. I like to hunt and grew up hunting. hunted all kinds of deer and elk and everything else, but I'm going to stick to deer and elk recipes for this. But jerky is very manly, okay? You don't need a lot of special equipment to make jerky. You can get a dehydrator if you want. You don't need to. But I'm going to give you some quick, easy recipes to make jerky. If you want to make jerky without a dehydrator, use your oven. Ovens work great, and you can make a lot of jerky, especially if you kill a deer or an elk or a couple deer and an elk, and you want to make jerky. Those little dehydrators take forever. Alpha males use ovens. And here's how you do it. You just put the oven on low. Oh, let me backtrack. Before you do this, so unless you live with somebody else who likes things clean, especially a woman, you want to cover the bottom of your oven with tinfoil. It'll make cleanup a lot easier. Anyway, once you've done that, you're going to turn it on low. Turn your oven on low heat, like as low as it'll possibly go. Now what you need to do is take those racks out before they get too hot and you can't touch them. Just take the racks out. Now you just cut your meat, your wild game. You want to use the leanest cuts for this. I like fatty meat. I like to eat fatty meat, but for jerky, you want to trim the fat off. So for this, the front legs of an animal work really well. The back hindquarters work really well. What you would consider on people like the forearms and the calves, the same thing on the animals, like the very front of the legs, the bottom of the legs. Those are very lean meat. Those make great jerky. Now, you want to cut this into nice thin strips. Okay? And you can pretty much flavor this however you want. If you just want to go to the store and buy a bunch of teriyaki sauce and make teriyaki jerky, that works great. But my favorite things to make are the really spicy jerky and salt and vinegar jerky. Okay? Now, to make salt and vinegar jerky, it's super simple. You cut it into nice thin strips. You can rinse it off if you want. I usually don't even care. Cut it into nice thin strips. You dip it into vinegar, just straight like white, cheap vinegar. You soak it in there, let it marinate for a couple minutes, a couple hours, doesn't really matter. Then you take it out and you roll it in salt. Good, thick, coarse salt, like kosher salt or thicker. And you roll the strips in there, and then you lay them on the rack, and when the rack is full, you put the rack in the oven. Now, my next recipe, make them real spicy. Okay? For this one, you can, if you want to taste pretty good, use some red wine. You can soak the meat in red wine, but you don't have to. But it really does break down that muscle tissue and make it kind of tender when it dries out, more so than it would be normally. But you take some red wine, soak it in there, then when you take it out, you roll it in the crushed red pepper. Okay, crushed red pepper or some cayenne pepper, but I like the really thick, coarse crushed red pepper, and some black pepper really gives it some heat. It makes that, red pepper makes it hot, and the black pepper makes it burn. You roll it around in there, and the same thing, you just lay it on the racks and put it in the oven. Here's how you know when it's done. When it looks like beef jerky, it's done. Pretty simple. Okay, you don't want it to be wet to the touch, but other than that, you really can't over dry it. If you over dry it, it'll be pretty brittle, but it's still jerky. You can still eat it. When it gets that nice, dry but flexible, kind of leathery feel, it's perfect. It's done. Take it out. Okay, and then you just put it in bags. Another real tip is let it cool down, obviously, before you put it in plastic bags. But if you put a little bit of rice in there with it, or a little bit of, or even just a paper towel in there in the plastic bag, when you seal it, it'll keep that moisture, any extra moisture that comes out, it'll keep the jerky dry and stop it from going bad. So, a couple quick recipes for jerky there. You can do it with elk. You can do it with pretty much any non-fatty meat. You don't want to do it with poultry. Not really safe. You don't want to do it with any kind of fatty animal like a raccoon or anything like that. I guess you could do it with wild turkey. I've never done that, but stick to your four-legged deer-type animals for making jerky. It works really well. Man, this has really got me thinking about one of the things I love about hunting is all the stuff I get to make with it. I love making sausage and jerky and making my own deer sausage and mixing it up and grinding it up with apples and wild apples that I pick myself, even more manly, and with some fennel and some bay leaves and some garlic. Oh, so good. But that'll have to be a whole nother episode. Maybe we'll do a whole wild game cooking recipe episode and how to process wild game and stuff. But man, that's just almost as much fun as going out and hunting your own food. But anyway, Moving on, I'll give you another wild game recipe, and I think we'll probably wrap it up because this episode actually has taken longer than I thought that it would. Okay, so the next one, the last one, if you don't know about the inside tenderloin or the outside tenderloin on a deer or an elk, you're missing out. So you can look this up on YouTube. This is really not great for audio, but basically the piece of meat that runs along the spine and either inside of the ribs or outside of the ribs, depending on the size of the animal, is a great, delicious piece of meat. And you want to harvest that, and it comes out long and skinny. Kind of like your forearm would look, but much more tender than that. And you want to take that. It's not got any bones or anything in it. It's just a nice, tender, beautiful strip of meat. Okay, when you kill your animal, if you can help it, don't freeze this meat. You can freeze everything else and do it later, but this you want to keep fresh and eat it right on the campfire, right in hunting camp, whatever it is. You can do this if you're not a hunter. You can do this with beef tenderloin too. But just real quick, simple recipe. You take it. It's a long, skinny strip. You cut it into medallions. You want it between 1 inch and 1.5 inches thick. You don't want it thin because then you're going to overcook it. You want a nice, thick, round piece of meat, what you'd call a medallion, about the size of, well, it depends on the animal. Obviously, a deer tenderloin is going to be a lot smaller than an elk tenderloin. But you cut it into nice medallions, about 1 inch, 1.5 inches thick. If it's fresh, just straight cut off the animal, you can cook it just like that, but you might want to soak it in salt water just for a few minutes, a real salty, briny water, to get most of that blood out. That salt will suck that blood out of that meat. Then you just want to give it a nice quick rinse. You don't have to get all the salt off of it, but if you keep that brine on there, it's going to be too salty. Here's the key. Don't overcomplicate it. A little bit of salt, a little bit of black pepper. Now this is going to be a pretty lean cut of meat, so you might want to rub it with some oil. Olive oil works good. If you have some leftover duck fat or any kind of fat like that, it works really good. Just coat it in that and make sure that it's nice and moist. And you want to put it in a nice hot pan, like high heat, with some oil in it. Or on a grill or on a fire or on a stick in a fire in a high heat. And here is the key. Don't overcook it. Rare meat is happy meat, especially game meat, red meat. You want it rare. The rarer the better. If you don't like red meat, you don't like blood in your meat, then you can cook it a little bit more, but don't overcook it. Okay? Cook it high heat, fast heat, a couple minutes on one side. When you see it starting to, that grayish, dark brownish color starts to work its way up the meat at all, you want to flip it over and then take it off. Just a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper. And that is all you need for that. And it's a great piece of meat. If it's tough and it's rubbery, it's not because the meat is bad, it's because you overcooked it. That piece of meat, even on an old, grizzly, alpha male elk, is going to be tender if you cook it right. And it's delicious. And it's not gamey, it's flavorful, and it's awesome. Okay, I'd say that was my last one, but I thought about it, and I'm going to give you one more. Now, one thing that I'm still learning about, and I don't know a lot about, women. They are a mystery to me. They probably always will be. But one thing I know about women is they usually appreciate a man that can cook them a nice meal. And if you can find a woman that likes to throw down on a rare piece of elk tenderloin on a first date, that's awesome. Or the first time you cook for her, that's awesome. But not all women are going to do that, okay? So, I'll give you a good civilized meal that you can make. Pasta. Pasta is easy to make, and you can make it fancy, and you can make it look fancy, and it's almost impossible to destroy it. 2 ways to cook pasta. If you ever go to Italy, which I love going to Italy, the way you're supposed to cook it is al dente. That means it's soft on the outside and it's got a little bit of a bite, a little bit of brittleness to it on the inside. Most Americans don't eat it like that, so you may not want to cook it like that because it may be kind of off-putting to somebody that's not used to it. But that's the way you're supposed to cook it. But the big thing about it is it's pasta. Unless you leave it on there way too long, you really can't overcook it. You throw it in there. Tip for this, if you're cooking for a date, that butterfly pasta, that bow tie pasta, all the pasta cooks the same, so you might as well get the fanciest stuff you can get and make it look really good. Cook that pasta. It's easy to cook, throw a little bit of salt in the water, boil it until it's done. Now for the sauce, okay? Depending on your cooking ability, you can just go to the store and buy Ragu red sauce. It's not my favorite. It'll work fine. You can add it on there, but then make it like it's homemade. the way to use that sauce and make it look like a good home-cooked meal even though you bought the sauce, buy a couple fresh tomatoes, slice them up, and throw them in there while you're heating up that sauce and cooking it. Don't throw cold sauce on there, guys. Put it in a pan and warm it up. Throw some fresh tomatoes in there. Spend the money, buy some fresh basil and some fresh oregano and throw it on the top. Don't mix it in the sauce. Put the sauce on the pasta and throw that on the top. And it looks really nice and professional. It tastes a lot better. And when you're doing that, use white cheese. If you're going to put cheese on top, use Parmesan or mozzarella or some kind of white cheese. Don't put yellow cheese on it. That is not authentic Italian, okay? And I'm Italian. My name's Melito. Just if you're looking for some credentials there. Okay, but a better way to go is you make that pasta, then make your own Alfredo sauce. It's so good, and it's so simple. I'm not going to give you an exact recipe, but it's easy to make. You want whole milk, some heavy whipping cream, and some butter. And you heat that up with some minced garlic on a stove until it's all mixed together. And that's really all you need. You want to boil it until it gets kind of thick and then turn it off and let it thicken. This is going to take more time, so you need to plan this out an hour or two in advance. And make that a little bit of garlic and salt to taste. And then add that to the pasta. You can either dump it on top or you can mix all the pasta in with it and then put it in a bowl, depending on whether you want it really thick or really runny. And then, just for looks, add a little bit of fresh basil on top and a little bit of Parmesan cheese and a little bit of mozzarella cheese. Use both on this one. And then that's a good, cheap, delicious, fancy meal that you can make for a lady. And if you want to add a little bit of meat to that meal, then make it a little bit more manly. Add a good, nice, lean piece of chicken breast to the Alfredo one. So white sauce, white meat. And for the red sauce we talked about earlier, the simpler one, just buy some beef sausage. Not like breakfast sausage, like dinner sausage. Some beef sausage, and just cook that. Sausage you cook well done. You don't ever cook it rare if you didn't know, guys. And just cook that, get a little bit seared, high heat, with a little bit of oil in a pan, and cook that sausage, and then add that to the top of your red sauce. And it'll be great. And then red drinks with red sauce and white drinks with white sauce. Pretty simple. Red meat with red sauce and white meat with white sauce. So pretty simple there. And that's something you can make, not just for a lady for a date, but it's good for that. You can make it for a family or guests that are coming over. Pasta's cheap. That sauce is not super expensive, and it's really good. And it fills you up. And there's some good recipes, some good alpha male recipes for you. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. It went a lot longer than I thought. I need to cook something other than eggs every once in a while. Get back in the swing of things. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Share it with your friends. And check out some of the past episodes. Thanks, and have a blessed day.